All right, well, as we begin, I got to tell you, the hardest part of all this was to figure out how to start. Where do you start? And you're like, well, just open and start. Kind of, but there's so much kind of prefacing that we need to do, so I'm going to do what I can, do my best. But before I jump into the prefacing of it, I just wanted to kind of do a quick survey, just to get a sense of where we are as a group. If you could just indicate, raised hand, however, have you ever looked at Revelation before, closely? Have you ever tried to figure it out before? Okay. Has anyone just steered clear of it until now? They've just been weirded out by it. Okay. That helps me. All right. I know a lot of Christians have learned just enough of it to not want to go into it, so I just didn't know if anyone was in that camp here tonight. Just as a heads up, if your ultimate interest in the book of Revelation is figuring out how everything's going to go down crystal clearly, it's a pretty good chance you'll be disappointed in our look at it. Not because there's none of that in there, but as I've read it and studied it, what I have found, I think you'll find this too, without me having to tell you this, the emphasis isn't so much on knowing everything that's going to happen. The emphasis is on the deeper theme and truth that is repeatedly brought out, not just in Revelation, but throughout the whole story. And so I just hope you don't come in thinking, ooh, I'm going to figure all this out now. Well, some, but not all, and that's fine. I think that's actually part of the point of all this. So, if I could start you not in Revelation, if I could invite you to turn to the book of Isaiah. One of the things that I've been happy to discover about the book of Revelation is actually, when you study the book of Revelation, you're studying a compilation of all the prophets. In fact, more than the prophets, the Old Testament storyline as well, but the prophets especially. There's a heavy emphasis in the book of Revelation on prophecy itself. The prophets and prophecy. So what I want to do, and I don't know how this is going to go, I've pictured it in my mind, but I just don't know how long it might take or what, but what direction it might turn. What I want to do is do a quick, we'll see if it's quick, but a walkthrough of the prophets with you. I'm going to point out, kind of be a tour guide for you, to point out a few things that are going to be really important to kind of carry along with you, stick it in your bag, so that when we get to Revelation and explore that, you'll be able to pull some things out and go, ooh, and hold things side by side. What I find so wonderful about the book of Revelation is that it's hard to look at any piece of Revelation without seeing a reference, an allusion, some pointer back to the Old Covenant prophecies and language in the Old Testament. So if you come to Revelation without that background with it, you're only seeing half the picture. And you're not even picking up what he's laying down. So this is going to be kind of probably a feeble effort to just kind of get us all ready from the Old Testament for what is brought out in Revelation. Let's see. Now, we're not going to go... Isaiah is really long, so I'm not going to take you all the way through that. But I wanted to start you out in chapter 6 of Isaiah. And this is the well-known portion in which Isaiah actually sees God. Now, we have to figure out how do we understand that, because we see in the New Testament the declaration that no one has ever seen God. And you're like, but that's weird, because I look at the Old Testament, there's some folks seeing God. I turn to Revelation, there's a guy seeing God. What's that all about? So you try to put that statement in the New Testament up against the things you're seeing in the Bible, and what we find out is, I think, what Ezekiel said, which is what we see described in a lot of these prophecies is not seeing God himself, but seeing an appearance of his glory. Which is to say, he's giving you something to look at, to get a sense of who he is, though it's very possible that's not actually him that you're seeing. Does anybody remember the story of Moses when he's up on the mountain, and God tells him, because he says, I want to see your glory. Does anyone remember what God said about that, what God did about that?
He says, you can't see my face, I'll walk. Get in the crevice of the rock, I'll walk past you, cover your face with my hand, and you'll see me walking away.
Okay, so which part of God does he get to see? his back. I don't even know what that means. Does God have a back? That's weird, right? But it's all this language. You're trying to put it all together to say, what does it mean to say, I've seen God, right? So, all of that leading up here to Isaiah 6. All right. Would somebody read for us? There's so much I want to read, but time. Let's see. Let's just start with this. Would someone read 1 through 7? Isaiah chapter 6, verses 1 to 7.
I'll read it, but I still use a King James, so...
Go for it.
Okay. In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw also the Lord sitting upon a throne, high and lifted up, and his train filled the temple. Above it stood the seraphims. Each one had 6 wings. With 2 he covered his face, and with 2 he covered his feet, and with 2 he did fly. And one cried unto another, and said, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. And the posts of the door moved at the voice of him that cried, and the house was filled with smoke. Then said I, Woe is me, for I am undone, because I am a man of unclean lips, and I dwell in the midst of a people of unclean lips. For mine eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. Then flew one of the seraphims unto me, having a live coal in his hand, which he had taken with the tongs from off the altar. And he laid it upon my mouth, and said, Lo, this hath touched thy lips, and thine iniquity is taken away, and thy sin purged.
All right, so there's this picture of seeing God. There's not much actually described about God himself in this one. But what do we know? According to verse 1, he is high, he is exalted. What is he sitting on? That's really important, yeah. And what's true of the train of his robe? It fills the whole temple. And it's also interesting to note, he's wearing a robe. He just says it like you assumed he was. And I'm like, okay, if God needs to wear a robe. And then, what are these creatures that are, it says, above him? I think that's weird, if I'm honest with you. If he's high and exalted, why would anything be above him spatially? That's just odd, but that's okay. He can do what he wants. But what are these creatures called here? Seraphim. Now, in the Hebrew, him means plural. So there would be a seraph is one. Seraphim is more than one. So there's multiple seraphs, if you want to call them that. And the description here, we're not going to go too deep into it now, but we're going to come back to this later in Revelation. Because John also, when he sees God's on the throne, sees some creatures that are weird. And we're going to come back and compare these. We'll see that also in Ezekiel. Okay. One more thing to notice here. 2 more, sorry. What is it they're calling out to each other in verse 3? These beings, these seraphim.
Holy, holy, holy.
Now notice that the holy, holy, holy is Yahweh of hosts, or Yahweh Almighty. But notice the ending here is, the whole earth is full of his glory. Now you get to Revelation, we're going to see a similar call between creatures around God's throne, but it changes a little bit. So just keep that in your bag, and we'll get to that later. We'll talk about why that might be. But also, look at verse 5. What is the response of the prophet when he sees God? Oh, he's undone. He's terrified, and he's just kind of like, I'm done, I'm going to die. Because not only has he seen the Holy One, holy, 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 what is true of him? He's unclean. I can't be here. In fact, the fact is he wasn't even allowed to go into the earthly holy of holies where God's presence is on earth, let alone to be in the actual place of God's dwelling. Like, no wonder the guy just thinks he's gone. He's about to be eviscerated. Wonderfully, though, he's shown that he's allowed to be here, and God makes sure that he's atoned for. His sin is atoned for. I love this. This is beautiful. Okay. Now, Isaiah would take too long to go through a lot of this. So if I could just show you a few more things. Let's see. Go to Isaiah 24, just to give you another sampling of what we might see in Revelation that will remind you of this. If you have headings in your Bible, what does the heading in chapter 24 say? Devastation of the earth. Is anything else in any other Bible? Destruction. What is it? Emptiness of the earth, or emptying of the earth. If you read through this chapter 24, you see a lot of language similar to what we're going to see in Revelation, where it's just mass destruction on a global scale, and it's almost like you're left with the idea everything's over. There's nothing left, right? Now, you'll keep looking and you're like, okay, that's not quite true. But what you're seeing as you look through the prophets is they are using big, extreme, poetic expressions that if you take them literally, you go the wrong direction. But if you take the sense of what they're saying, is things have gotten so bad and God is coming out with such a wrath, it's as if He's destroyed everything. So when you go through the prophets, you're actually getting a sense, or you're almost getting a practice run of how to deal with the book of Revelation. Do I take it super literally, or can I give a little room for prophetic poetry? And that's one reason I want to look at some of these things with you, just to give you an idea. When you come to Revelation, if you don't take in the way the prophets wrote earlier than John, you really aren't sure how to deal with what he wrote. But as you go through the prophets of the Old Testament, you see what literally happened, what was probably poetic based on the history of things. It kind of gives you an idea of how to deal with Revelation. Also, by the way, let's look at chapter 18 and go all the way up until 24 and look at what the headings say. Prophecies against all these different nations, right? I see Egypt, Cush, Babylon, Edom, Arabia, Jerusalem. Okay, now we're hitting home to the Jewish people. Tyre. Now, as you look through all the way through the prophets, as you look at how God expresses judgment on different nations of the world, you're going to get a real clear pattern of how John sees the declarations of judgment on a place called Babylon in the book of Revelation. It is so sticking to the pattern of the prophets. It's remarkable. That's why I wanted to go through this tonight before we start. That if you want to understand Revelation, it's almost necessary that you become a little bit familiar with how the prophets of the Old Testament did their thing. Because it's like, there it is. It's the same pattern. And it's actually pretty awesome when you get an idea of that. Now, lest I stay in Isaiah all night, we're going to press on. Let's go to Jeremiah. Jeremiah is interesting because there's a lot of narrative in Jeremiah. He's not real epic descriptions like in Isaiah and other places of things as much. But he has so much that he says to the nation of Israel about repenting and coming back to the Lord. But one thing I wanted to point out to you about Jeremiah's prophecies is he has a lot of parables and symbols and examples. Kind of reminds you of the way Jesus taught. So like Jeremiah 13, for instance. You see, the heading says a linen belt. Jeremiah is told, hey, take a belt and go hide it in a little nook next to the water, next to the river. He says, okay. And he goes and does that, comes back. A little while later, God says, hey, go get that belt that I had you hide away. Okay. He gets it. And if it's inside of a moist, dank place, what do you think happened to the linen belt?
Mold.
It gets nasty. Yeah, let's see. How does he describe it here? Okay, he says in verse 7, it was ruined and completely useless. Yeah. Like, even if it ties, you don't want to wear this nasty thing anywhere. Okay, so the belt is now ruined and completely useless. Now God uses this as an object lesson and says about Israel, you've become ruined and useless to me. You've become as spoiled as this belt is to me. Interesting object lesson, I would say, like a parable that he had to live out. Also, you can see in the very next section, wineskins. He uses a wineskins as a parable to teach. In chapter 24, go over to 24 with me. Look at the heading there. Jeremiah gets this parable as a vision, as a prophet, to help people understand what God's getting at here. So he sees these baskets of figs. There's 2 of them. And look at verse 3 with me. This is true through a lot of the prophets. There's this interview that God does with people, or there's an interview with angels and the prophet. There's always this back and forth question and answer, and it's always for the benefit of the reader as much as the one being interviewed. We're getting answers while they're getting their answers. So look what God says. Yahweh asked me, "What do you see, Jeremiah?" We see that so many times to the prophets. What do you see? It's like a daddy talking to his kid. And then Jeremiah answers, "Figs. The good ones are very good, but the bad ones are so bad they cannot be eaten." Now, all the way through, you're going to see this pattern. The separating between God's righteous ones and the wicked, even amongst God's people. The ones who should be faithful, they have turned against God. All the way through the prophets, there's this separation. Like Jesus talked about the sheep and the goats kind of thing. There's always a clear separation between God's elect, or his remnant, the faithful, and those who have turned their backs on God. Now, if you don't see that when you read through Revelation, read again. This picture of those who belong to God, talk about being sealed, and those who are just a part of the wickedness of the world, and they have their own seal. That's going to be a huge theme all the way through the prophets and the book of Revelation. So it's interesting here just how many parables that we see, and that comes up, of course, in Revelation as well. Ezekiel, oh my goodness. You think Revelation's interesting. You should try to get a hold of Ezekiel. Oh my gosh. So go to Ezekiel chapter 1 with me. Skip Lamentations, just for now. Don't do it forever, just for now. I wish you had more time to talk about the vision of Ezekiel in chapter 1 of God and these creatures and these wheels. So weird. But it's awesome. And if you have the imagination for it, I just beg you to turn to some of these later and take more time. Read the details of how they describe things and try to put yourself in their shoes as they experience it. You got to do it with a Revelation too. You just have to. The details are there to help us just be like, oh. But I mean, as you read, we can't read through all of this, but as you see the details, let's just get started here. Would someone read in Ezekiel 1, verses 4 to 9?
I looked and I saw a windstorm coming out of the north, an immense cloud with flashing lightning and surrounded by a brilliant light. The center of the fire looked like glowing metal. Did you say number 9?
Yeah.
And their wings touched one another, each one...
Oh, I think you skipped a verse there.
4 through 9.
Yeah, start at verse 5 if you would.
Verse 5.
Yeah.
Okay. And the fire was what looked like 4 living creatures in appearance. Their form was that of a man, but each of them had 4 faces and 4 wings. Their legs were straight, their feet were like those of a calf, and gleamed like burnished bronze. Under their wings, on their 4 sides, they had the hands of a man. All 4 of them had faces and wings, and their wings touched one another. Each one went straight ahead. They did not turn as they moved.
What in the world? And then keep reading it. We don't have time. But keep reading it. It gets weirder. And it's going to remind you a lot of what we're going to read in Revelation. What is he seeing? And why did God make these beings? They're so weird. But I wanted to look at verse 15 with you. No, I'm sorry. I want to go to 22. It says, spread out above the heads of the living creatures was what looked like something of a vault, sparkling like crystal and awesome. See, before, in the picture of Isaiah, where were the seraphim? Above God. In this picture, above the creatures, he calls them living creatures, interestingly. And how many of them are there? 4. Keep that in your bag. But in this picture, above those things is God himself in this vault. Interesting. Under the vault their wings were stretched out, one toward the other, and each had 2 wings covering its body. When the creatures moved, I heard the sound of their wings like the roar of rushing waters, like the voice of the Almighty. By the way, keep that detail of rushing waters in your bag. That's going to come out later too. Like the tumult of an army. When they stood still, they lowered their wings. Get this. Then there came a voice from above the vault. Who do you suppose this is? Oh. Okay, if you're there with me, if you're in the picture with me, you've already been just like turned to mush by every weird thing you've just seen. But then, in all the other stuff you're hearing and seeing, there's this voice. And it comes at you from even above these amazing creatures. Oh, what is the voice going to say? Above the vault, over their heads... Oh no, I skipped something. Then there came a voice from above the vault over their heads, and they stood... What does it say?
Lowered wings.
Whoa. What does that tell you about their attitude towards the one speaking? Now, up till now, they've had wings doing all kinds of stuff. And as soon as this voice from above them is heard, what is their posture? Oh my gosh. Now, if you can get into this picture, you're getting some good practice for Revelation. I mean, these things, they're here to not just give you facts to think of, they're here to give you this whole experience to it. Now, we as modern people, we live in the age of digital, visual, whatever. When this was written, back in the old days, how did they encounter new ideas from other people? It was always written down or passed on how? Word of mouth. So when you heard descriptions, when you read descriptions, you had been trained, better than we have been, to fully immerse yourself in the description rather than wait for someone to make a movie out of it. You know what I'm talking about? Like, we're a little bit of a disadvantage just because of how we've been, especially in my generation, how we've been thoroughly trained to wait for the movie. But here, if you're able to, don't let that hold you back. Let each detail of description really capture you and bring you in. This is not academic. This is experiential here, right? Above the vault, verse 26, over their heads was what looked like a throne of lapis lazuli. Is everybody familiar with that? It's one of the only thing I'm familiar with really from it that's famous is in Babylon. In ancient Babylon, they had constructed these huge walls and gateways and decorated them with lapis lazuli. We've uncovered some of them and seen how it was used. And it's like this bluish color. It's pretty beautiful. But anyways, what was I reading here? Oh yeah, it was what looked like a throne of lapis lazuli, bright, right, colorful. And high above, on the throne, was a figure like that of a man. Now, he doesn't say he saw a man, right? He says a figure that reminds him of the form of a man. I saw that from what appeared to be his waist up. Do you like how he says that? What appeared to be his waist up. Couldn't tell you for sure. I love this. What appeared to be his waist up, he looked like what? Stick that in your bag, will you? Stick that in your bag. This picture is going to be consistent throughout the prophets. As if full of fire. And that from there down, the waist down, what did he look like? Fire. Keep that one in there too. And brilliant light surrounded him. Like the appearance of a rainbow, keep that one in your bag. Like the appearance of a rainbow in the clouds on a rainy day, so was the radiance around him. So like a rainbow around him. Keep that in mind. That's going to come up. And then finally, this was the appearance of the likeness. Did you see that? This was the appearance of the likeness. That kind of leaves wiggle room for maybe that wasn't God himself, but how he portrayed himself in this moment for the prophet to see. This was the appearance of the likeness of the glory of Yahweh. When I saw it, what happened to him? Like, come on, Isaiah's feeling it, Ezekiel's feeling it. Well, when you experience this, you have to respond physically and every other way. And I heard the voice of one speaking. And you're like, what'd he say? What'd he say? Keep reading, you'll get there. But we're going to move on, just because I want to do a little bit more of a tour. Wow, there's so much here. Oh, go to Ezekiel 40 with me. This is something unique to Ezekiel until you get to Revelation, really. A little background. Do you remember who built the first temple for God? Who was the first one to build a temple for God? Solomon. Now, before that, we had a tabernacle. Sorry, I was supposed to keep writing these down up here. Before the temple, we had a tabernacle built by the Israelites under Moses' direction. But it was movable. It was a tent. It wasn't meant to last forever. And so David really wanted to build a temple. God said no. Do you remember why?
Killed too many people.
Yeah, you got blood on your hands. You're not the right guy. So who was chosen? His son, Solomon, who was to be a man of peace. He ruled over the kingdom in great peace. So he was able to build it. Do you remember who destroyed that temple? Which nation? Babylon. Interesting, because Babylon is a major player in the story of Revelation. We'll see about that. Anyways, Babylon comes in, destroys the temple, and the people are taken into exile for 70 years. And they're able to come back and rebuild it, as you read in the story of Nehemiah. And so anyway, or not Nehemiah, sorry, Ezra. Nehemiah is the building of the walls. So in all of this, Ezekiel's in captivity. He's carried off, and he's a stranger in a strange land when he gets these visions. Starting in chapter 40, he starts to have a vision about the temple being rebuilt and restored. Now, we're not going to it goes on. Keep looking. It goes into chapter 40, 41, 42. So much detail, so many descriptions. And in chapter 43, Ezekiel sees that the God who had left the temple earlier, removed his presence from his people earlier, now that he sees the temple being rebuilt and restored, what does he see in chapter 43? Look at the heading there. God is now willing to return and dwell among his people again. Right? And then we read the altars restored, the priesthoods restored, on and on it goes. Israel's restored in chapter 45. So if you were to summarize this whole section of Ezekiel, the word, if you want to go with the headings at least, the word that describes it all is what? Restored. Right? Recreated, restored. God is with his people again. And there are priests who can serve God again. That whole theme, put that whole big chunk in your bag. You have room. It's like Mary Poppins' bag. You can fit all kinds of stuff in. So put that in your bag for later, because that is going to come popping to life in Revelation. That the way of honoring and serving God is restored fully, and God is dwelling with his people again. Oh, it's so good. Okay, how about in Daniel? Let's go to Daniel. Now, Daniel, there's several sections in Daniel that is very reminiscent of what we're reading in Revelation. So go to chapter 7 with me, Daniel 7. And Daniel has this really weird vision. It really bothers him. And it would bother me too, as I try to put myself in his shoes, if I had this dream or vision. And he says he dreamed it. Okay, so yeah, this is kind of a nightmare actually. What does he see? Well, let's start in verse 2. Would somebody read verse 2 to verse 7?
In my vision that night, I, Daniel, saw a great storm churning the surface of a great sea, strong winds blowing from every direction. Then 4 huge beasts came up out of the water, each different from the others.
If you could pause right there. From where did they come?
Out of the water.
See.
Okay, put that in your bag. Okay, carry on.
The first beast was like a lion with eagle's wings. As I watched, its wings were pulled off, and it was left standing there with its 2 hind feet on the ground like a human being, and it was given a human mind. Then I saw a second beast, and it looked like a bear. It was rearing up on one side, and it had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth. I heard a voice saying to it, "Get up, devour the flesh of many people." Then the third of these strange beasts appeared, and it looked like a leopard. It had 4 birds' wings on its back, and it had 4 heads. Great authority was given to this beast. Then in my vision that night I saw a fourth beast, terrifying, dreadful, and very strong. It devoured and crushed its victims with huge iron teeth and trampled their remains beneath its feet. It was different from any of the other beasts, and it had 10 horns.
Okay, so first of all, weird. Okay, beasts that have appearance like things we know about in nature, but they're beasts. They're not quite those animals. They're just like those animals. And then they've got wings. They've got multiple heads. They've got multiple horns. What's happening here? Now they represent actual nations, right? Like you keep reading and you find out. Do you remember which nation is represented by the first beast that's like a bear?
Russia.
No, I'm sorry, not a bear. Where am I? Lion, sorry. The first beast, like a lion, is representative of the same nation that took out the temple of God, Babylon. And they're the ones that took Israel into captivity. So, okay, that's the lion, which is powerful, the king of the jungle, we call it, but it's just considered to be one of the fiercest and most powerful beasts. And then the second beast is the bear, and who does that represent? Anybody know the story of the empires of the world? Who takes out Babylon?
Medo-Persian.
Yeah, we'll call it Persian, but the Medo-Persian Empire. So the Persians come in, and they're the ones that send the Israelites back home after captivity. And they're pictured as this massive bear that is able to eat its fill of the flesh, or consume a bunch of people, as the other one said. The third beast represents which empire? The leopard, the fast one. Do you remember? Greece. They come in, and notice it says how many heads did it have? 4. And the 4 heads represent 4 generals that would take over the empire after Alexander the Great dies. Really sad story, by the way. You spend your peak of life taking over the world like lightning. Talk about blitzkrieg. Take over the world really fast. By the time you've beaten everybody and taken over the world, you die. Like he didn't even get to enjoy his conquest. He was, by the way, a pretty awful guy. But he dies probably with liver problems or whatever they said. But he then has to, well, he doesn't get to, but the nation is now divided up 4 ways within the generals. So the 4 heads actually represent something, the leaders of the nation. And then the last beast, which he doesn't even describe it like an animal because it's different. It's just different. And it's horrifying and scary. And how many horns does it have? 10 horns. And as you keep reading, you find out horns prophetically. Horns represent power, which usually connects to some kind of ruler. Some ruler of a nation. So keep all this in your bag. I know there's a lot to keep in your bag. Do your best. We'll come back and review, don't worry. But there's so much more here. But here's what I really want to look at with you. I want you to see his vision of God and somebody else that comes into the story. Would somebody read 9 through 14? If nothing else happens tonight, just reading what the prophets say about God will nourish your soul, right? This is totally worth it. But someone read 9 through 15.
I watched as thrones were put in place, and the Ancient One sat down to judge. His clothing was as white as snow, his hair like purest wool. He sat on a fiery throne with wheels of blazing fire, and a river of fire was pouring out, flowing from his presence. Millions of angels ministered to him. Many millions stood to attend him. Then the court began its session, and the books were opened. How far was I to go?
To verse 9. No, what? 14, sorry.
14. I continued to watch because I could hear the little horn's boastful speech. I kept watching until the 4th beast was killed and its body was destroyed by fire. The other 3 beasts had their authority taken from them, but they were allowed to live a little while longer. As my vision continued that night, I saw someone like a son of man coming with the clouds of heaven. He approached the Ancient One and was led into his presence. He was given authority, honor, and sovereignty over all the nations of the world, so that people of every race and nation and language would obey him. His rule is eternal. It will never end. His kingdom will never be destroyed.
Oh, man. Woo! We can go home now. That was good. Oh, so good. Now, Jesus would, of course, refer to himself as the Son of Man, which, by all accounts, this is why. It seems to be why. He's pointing to this picture of this really special and different person that receives all of this authority and honor from God himself. And what else does it say? That because of the authority given to him by God, all the nations and peoples of every language would worship him with an eternal kingdom. Just as a side note, you just want to talk about all this, but you can't. Somebody pointed out to me many years ago, and I think it's so beautiful. If you take verse 14, and you compare it to what Jesus said in the Great Commission, you just about see an exact lineup of what Jesus said the apostles were to do. Just to give you a brief run through of that, how did Jesus begin what he said? All authority in heaven and earth has been given to me. Huh! Look at that. The Ancient of Days gave him all authority, glory, and sovereign power. And then what does Jesus say? Therefore, because of that, go and make disciples of. Now, if you make disciples of people and teach and baptize them and teach them to command everything Jesus said, what are they doing? It says here, all nations and peoples of every language worshipped him. When we make disciples, we're fulfilling this prophecy right there. And it's been happening for 2,000 years. It's pretty awesome. Okay. Now, the kingdom that will never be destroyed and doesn't pass away is a common theme through the prophecies. We can't look at them all tonight, but keep that in your bag. It's a part of the story of Revelation. Okay. I'm going to have to go faster. There's so much. Okay. Oh, how about... No, I'll skip that. Okay. Go to Hosea with me. Hosea. I'm going in order of the prophets, so it shouldn't be hard to just get to the next one as we finish the last one. If you're familiar with the story of Hosea, who would be willing to summarize the book of Hosea for us? It's a narrative. Most of it's just a storyline with words from God mixed in. Anybody know the storyline of Hosea?
He marries a nasty woman.
Okay, what's that? He marries a nasty woman.
Nasty woman. And then she keeps going out with other people. He keeps taking her back. Like just like God keeps taking her back, And she keeps sinning and he keeps taking her back.
Yes. And talk about the sacrificial lifestyle of a prophet. And he's not the only one. There are other prophets who had to go through this, like Ezekiel. God would say to them, Jeremiah too. By the way, just sorry to interrupt, but Jeremiah was told, your wife's going to die, don't cry for her. What? Because that's going to be a picture of what happens to Israel. Okay, thanks. But here, God says, you're going to marry a woman, have kids with her. She's going to be I'll be polite. She's going to be unfaithful. But you're going to take her back. Keep doing it. In fact, you're going to pay for her. You're going to pay your money to get her back because even though she's unfaithful, she's your wife, and you're going to do that. Now, why was God going through all this through Hosea? What was the point of this parable, this living parable? What was God saying about his nation? You're awful. You will not be faithful to me, no matter how many times I call you back to myself, but I am not giving up on you. If you ever want to be encouraged by the dauntless, persistent love of God for his beloved, you got to dig in some Hosea. Man, what a picture he gives us here of God's in. But anyway, what I wanted you to just realize about the book of Hosea when it comes to the book of Revelation is just like the other prophets. When you read the judgment that's going to come, a lot of the language he uses about the judgment God's going to bring matches up to Revelation. The language in Revelation is so consistent like with the other prophets. Okay, how about Joel? Hello, we saved a seat for you. Now, Joel's interesting for several reasons. But when you look at the opening of Joel, we're kind of taking a walkthrough of the prophets because it's going to help us get ready for Revelation.
Them minor prophets are they say a lot more than people think.
Yeah, you hear the word minor, you're like, eh.
Yeah.
But they're very, very full and rich. What do you see in chapter 1 of Joel? What does the heading of in your Bible say? Locusts. Invasion of locusts. That's interesting. That image is going to come up in Revelation as well. The question here that's debated is he actually talking about locusts, or is he comparing this? Have you ever seen a swarm of locusts?
Yeah.
Like, if not in person, have you seen it portrayed on something?
Hear them first.
What is it?
Usually hear them first.
Okay, yeah, seriously. The comparison of an invading army to a swarm of locusts coming is so spot on. Partly because of the noise, the cloud filling the sky, the number of them, but also, what is the effect of a swarm of locusts coming through an area? What happens to the area?
Devastation.
Devastated, right? It happened in Egypt during one of the plagues. It consumes and devours everything. It leaves you without everything. This would be the picture also of warfare. When you have a massive army coming through, this is true all throughout time. One of the reasons an army can continue to conquer is because to sustain their army, they have to take from who they've conquered. You consume everything. Food, riches. You don't conquer people, usually, just to say, hi, wanted to stop by and visit. You take everything you want and leave them with nothing. And you consider it what we call spoils of war. That's the same picture of the locust. Now, just keep that in mind because he also mentions that in chapter 2, an army of locusts. And the language here is very similar to things we're going to see in Revelation. I just wanted to give you a picture of that. This idea of a locust, and they have appearance of horses. Like the weirdness of the imagery is very consistent throughout the prophets. It's not new to Revelation, and we don't have to be too weirded out by it because it's got real meanings that we can look for and find. We'll come back to these things when they come up. I'm just trying to give you a sweeping overview here. How about this? Go to chapter 3 with me, if you would. Now, if we go too fast, please just tell me. I'm trying to be mindful of time, but I don't want it to be overwhelming or unhelpful. All right. Now, as you read through chapter 3, there's the speaking of war, and in fact, go up to chapter 3, verse 15. Oh, there's so many parallels. Actually, go to 13 first. Go to chapter 3, 13, and what do you see? Swing the sickle, for the harvest is ripe. That's going to come up in Revelation. Come trample the grapes, for the winepress is full, and the vats overflow. So great is their wickedness. That's going to come up in Revelation. Verse 15. Would somebody read 15 and 16?
The sun and the moon will be darkened, and the stars no longer shine. The Lord will roar from Zion and thunder from Jerusalem. The earth and the sky will tremble, but the Lord will be refuge for his people, a stronghold for his people of Israel.
This language of the heavenly bodies being either disappearing or just going out, or just the whole pattern of creation being interrupted like that is very consistent through the prophets, and you don't really see it interpreted literally. It's supposed to symbolize how chaotic the situation on earth would be. It's so chaotic that things you always count on being there, like sun, moon, and stars, they describe it poetically as going out or turning. I mean, it becomes, in Revelation we'll see it too, they fall out of the sky. And it's this poetic way of saying everything you've counted on being consistent, it's all chaos now. And so again, if you go through the prophets, you get in a sense of how do I use some of this language literally, poetically, what do I do with it? And this gives us some practice. It helps us see how they did it before in the prophets. And then at the very end of chapter 3, the end of the book, is this picture of the blessing on God's people. It's a picture of Jerusalem being secure and holy. God's with them now. There is abundance and prosperity. Look at chapter 8, verse 18. A fountain will flow out of Yahweh's house. We're going to see that over and over again in the prophets. Water flowing out of the temple. Guess what happens in Revelation at the end of the story? There's water flowing out of the temple. Like, the picture is so consistent. It's beautiful. Now look, after talking about how God's enemies have been shedding the blood of his innocent people, look at verse 21. Will somebody read 21?
I will pardon my people's crimes, which I have not yet pardoned. And I, the Lord, will make my home in Jerusalem with my people.
Where was that?
21?
Is this chapter 3
Yeah.
of Joel?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a little bit.
Yeah. Maybe I have a wrong Bible.
Really?
Different one.
That's it.
Is that the NLT?
Yeah. You want to read it?
Huh. Okay.
You want to see it?
Well, just let me read the NIV.
Okay.
3:21. It says, "Shall I leave their innocent blood unavenged? No, I will not. Yahweh dwells in Zion." That is a really big difference.
Yeah.
What is up with that?
You have the NIV.
NIV.
I have the NIV too, and mine doesn't say that.
We're in Joel.
Mine is different also.
Joel 3:21.
Listen, mine says, "Their blood guilt, which I have not pardoned, I will pardon. The Lord dwells in Zion." This is NIV.
That's what mine
This is
Oh, that's so weird. Oh, that's the older. Okay, let me try to piece together what happened here.
Okay.
So,
You have a newer version?
the way that, okay, could you read that one again, the NIV?
Their blood guilt, which I have not pardoned, I will pardon. The Lord dwells in Zion.
So different. I'm trying to say, what did they do there? I don't know. Let me read this one again, because this is the one that applies to 21, to Revelation. Speaking of the suffering of his innocent ones, right? The bloodshed of his innocent ones, his people. He says, "Shall I leave their innocent blood unavenged? No, I will not. Yahweh dwells in Zion." Okay, interesting. I'm going to have to look into that and see what happened and
That's totally different.
which one worked.
Yeah, didn't you say?
Because one has to do with a blood debt
Yeah.
of sin, and one has to do with blood being spilled by the enemies. They both have to do with blood, though.
Do you have down below where it tells about what the scripture means? What does yours say?
Yeah, mine says, "This book of judgment ends on a promising and encouraging note. The Lord dwells in Zion, and therefore all is right with those who trust in God and live with Him." That's what mine.
Mine says Joel began with a prophecy about the destruction of the lands and ended with a prophecy about its restoration. He began by stressing that the need for repentance and ended with the promise of forgiveness that repentance brings. Joel was trying to convince the people to wake up, get rid of their complacency, and realize the danger of living apart from God. His message to us is that there is still time. Anyone who calls on God's name can be saved. Those who turn to God will enjoy the blessing mentioned in Joel's prophecy. Those who refuse will face destruction.
Yeah, but yours says
So-
punishment, right?
So in this one, in the one I have here, for whatever reason, in the new NIV, let me just read it again because this is what I want to connect to Revelation. "Shall I leave their innocent blood unavenged?
That's what mine says too.
No, I will not." Now, the reason I wanted to bring this up is this is going to be a big deal in Revelation as well. You actually see, we'll come back to it when we get there, but you'll see in one of the parts of it, there are souls that have been killed, righteous souls killed because of their righteousness and connection to Christ. And they cry out to God, "How long until you avenge our blood?" And God says, it'll take a little more time until all of them have suffered, and He gives them a robe and comforts them. This goes right back to the vengeance is mine, says the Lord. I will repay. The ones who suffer for Christ, who are the meek ones, who don't fight for their own justice, who don't fight to get their own vengeance and all that, the meek ones who rely on Christ, the whole book of Revelation is this reminder that if you suffer, continue to love and continue to be gracious, because there is someone who will see this wrong righted. It does not have to be you. And if it's never righted in your lifetime, the book of Revelation reminds us what? Wait a little bit longer. I'll get to it when it's time. Right? That's why. Now, the other reading pertains to Revelation in a different way, but not quite where I was going with it. Okay. Did you have a...
Yeah, there's a correlating scripture, Ezekiel 36:25.
Okay.
And it says, "I will sprinkle clean water on you, and you will be clean. I will cleanse you from all of your impurities and from all your idols."
So there again is the forgiveness part.
Yeah.
Okay, interesting. I just learned something tonight that I have to look into. What's up with the translation difference? Okay. Let's go to Amos now, if we could. Amos should be right next door to where we were. Let's see. We see other symbols and parables here, like in Amos 7 and 8. But I would love to look at 9 with you real quick, just a small portion of it. Again, look at where it is in the book. At the very end. And if you look, so much. I'll just focus on the very end. Verses 11 through 15. Amos 9, 11 to 15. After a lot of discussion of judgment and destruction, and I'll devastate the earth, but don't worry, I won't destroy everything, like in verse 8 here. God again gives you a vision of hope, of restoration, of peace that will last, and prosperity for His righteous ones. And I want to just wash over you, all of us really, with these promises from the old prophets, so that when we get there in Revelation, you'll be like, yes, there it is! I've been reading this all the way through, and now, boom, it's finally there. Okay, would someone read 11 through 15 for us?
In that day I will restore David's fallen tent. I will repair its broken places, restore its ruins, and build it as it used to be, so that they may possess the remnant of Edom and all the nations that bear my name, declares the Lord, who will do these things. The days are coming, declares the Lord, when the reaper will be overtaken by the plowman, and the planter by the one treading grapes. New wine will drip from the mountains and flow from all the hills. I will bring back my exiled people Israel. They will rebuild the ruined cities and live in them. They will plant vineyards and drink their wine. They will make gardens and eat their fruit. I will plant Israel in their own land, never again to be uprooted from the land I have given them, says the Lord your God.
Interestingly, this is a text in verse 11 especially, that Peter refers to talk about how that God is going to bring in Gentiles into His kingdom. Why would He say that? Look at verse 12. So they may possess the remnant of Edom and all the nations that bear my name. You're like, wait a minute, there's only one nation that bears your name. All the other nations are pagan idolaters. Yeah, all the way through the prophets, God keeps hinting, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. There's coming a day when all nations of the world will have people worshiping me. And I haven't even been able to walk through all of them with you because of time, but they're consistently in the words of the prophets. It's not just Israel's going to have a big day coming. It's Israel plus. And we're living in that right now, and we're going to see the fulfillment come even a little bit later. Obadiah is next. Super short. If you want to memorize the book of the Bible, this would be a good candidate. I mean, check it out. What's that?
I have a hard time with the word.
Okay. Now, Obadiah is especially about Edom. We saw that back in Amos. Edom is the nation that came from Esau. Remember who Esau's brother was? Jacob, yeah. Esau was the oldest, barely. They're twins, right? He's the hairy guy who likes hunting. How did his younger brother, Jacob, get the inheritance and get the blessing? Do you remember? Totally tricked him. Psych! So he gets the birthright, the inheritance, for a bowl of stew. My goodness. And then, and you can't really blame him for this second one. This was not his bad. Mommy works with Jacob to swindle poor Esau out of the blessing from his aged and dying father. Went full out, did a whole Hollywood, makeup job. He put on the hair, made himself smell bad, the whole deal. Brings his favorite stew and steals, basically, by being a jerk to dad and brother, steals the blessing. Now, he was taken care of. He did okay for himself, as you see in the book of Genesis. But his people, the nation that comes from him, they're called Edom. And in this book, Obadiah, really, from God's message to the nation of Edom, is you guys are going to be so extremely judged. And his reason is, when your brothers and sisters, Israel and Judah, were being punished, you were arrogant and gloating about it. That was why God got mad at them. Not that they did anything to Israel, except they enjoyed their suffering. And they laughed at their defeat. And God said, whoa, that is my people. And yes, they deserve what they got, but how dare you? Anybody learning lessons from that? Watch out. In fact, go to the Proverbs, you see it stated very clearly. If you gloat over your enemy's downfall, God will bring some down on you. Watch yourself. And that's what happens here in Obadiah. Anyway, what did I want to tell you about this? Chapter 1, which is the only chapter. Look at verse 17. A lot of judgment, a lot of judgment, a lot of judgment. But then, look at verse 17. By the way, we see this a lot as we're reading through the prophets. Mount Zion is what? What is that? Mountain Zion. You'll see that in Revelation too. So let's get that taken care of. That's Jerusalem. That's the mountain on which Jerusalem is built. So whenever you see Mount Zion referenced, we're speaking of the mountain of Jerusalem. The mountain of God, it's called. That's the dwelling place of God on the earth throughout the Old Testament. Okay, but on Mount Zion will be deliverance. It will be holy. Keep that. We keep seeing that. Jerusalem is a mess throughout the story of Israel. It's a place of corruption, of bloodshed. The prophets are killed there. Messiah is killed right outside of there. And you'll see that in Revelation. The city of Jerusalem is pictured as so wicked and so corrupt throughout the story. But in the promises of Israel's future, what does God keep saying over and over again? Jerusalem will be brought back to holiness. She will finally be the city and the people I want her to be. Because that's what he calls his dwelling place. So for the capital city of God, the Holy One, holy, 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 for that to be corrupt and wicked, can you not see why God would leave? He up and left in the vision of Ezekiel. He's like, I'm out of here. I can't stand this place anymore. So that he would say, I'm going to come back. And not only will it become holy again, it'll stay that way. Never to be corrupted. Does that not give you a picture of what Revelation is going to reveal about the new heavens and the new earth, the new creation? The temple language is all through Revelation, so we want to get that clear here. How about Jonah? Honestly, I can't tell you much about Jonah's connection to Revelation. It's just his next in the storyline, or in the order here. What I can say about Jonah, though, in reference to Revelation, and Jonah's a unique prophecy book because it's all story. The only part where God speaks through Jonah to a people is a one-liner, and then it's done. The whole story is God's message to whom? Jonah. And through Jonah, it's a message to Israel. Now, what was the message? Well, Jonah was told to go speak to horrible people. I mean, ghastly, hold-your-nose, wicked kind of people. Ninevites, the Assyrians. Nineveh is the capital city of Assyria. They are brutal, they are godless, just terrible people. And they have done terrible things to God's people. So by the time Jonah's told, go speak to the Ninevites, my message of doom, what did he say?
Run the other way.
See ya. He's out here. He tries to escape, go the opposite direction. How does God reel him back in? Do you remember? This is what we learned in Sunday school. How does God reel him back in? Big fish. Well, first of all, he sends a big storm to the ship so that they have to throw stuff over. And Jonah's like, okay, it's my fault. Send me over. Okay, guy. So they toss him over. And then the fish brings him back in. So he finally, okay, God, I got it. And he goes over to Nineveh, preaches this one-liner of a message. Doom's coming in 40 days. You're done. He gives him no hope. He doesn't even give him a but or an if. Straight judgment. That's all he offers them. What does the king on down in the city do? For a message from a God that's not even their own God. The king's like, oh man, what if he's right? What if the God of the Israelites is really going to take us out? So he calls for a fast, sackcloth and ashes repentance for the whole city. And from the king on down to the animals, it says. Whatever that's about. So anyway, the king on down to the animals are going to be living humbly in humility, waiting for the judgment clock to tick down, hoping for a reprieve, a call from the governor. And guess what? Now Jonah, while he's waiting to see what happens, he hates these people so much. He goes kind of on a pout trip to a place outside the city, and he just sits there, and what is he waiting for? He's waiting. He wants to see it. He wants to savor it. Go back to Obadiah. You know what I'm saying? Like enjoying the punishment of your enemies. But he's sitting there waiting, wanting to see God take these people out. And then he doesn't. And what is Jonah's attitude? Oh, God, this is exactly why I didn't want to come. I knew you're merciful. I know you would do this. Why don't you just kill them all, right? And so what does God do? This is the whole crux of the fish is not the story, right?
Right.
There's a plant that's actually more important than a fish. Because as he sits there pouting and upset, he doesn't blow up his enemies. God sends this plant overnight, super fast growing plant. And when the heat of the next day comes and the sun goes up, he's blocked and he's comforted by the plant. And God lets him enjoy the plant. And then what happens after that? Next day, God sends this worm to eat the plant. So now the next day, in the heat of the sun, he doesn't have the plant to comfort him. What's Jonah's attitude now? Come on, I want to die. He actually says this. I want to die. I'm so miserable. And if you ever have pouty kids, you just have some fellowship with God, okay? Just have some fellowship with your Father, because He knows exactly what that's all about. And I want to read the very end of Jonah with you, because this is the punchline of the book, and this is a major element that helps us understand the power of the Revelation message. The whole gospel message, really. Now, look at verse 9. Would somebody read Jonah 4, 9 through 11? Jonah chapter 4, verses 9 through 11. I think all of our Bibles will agree on this part. Okay.
But God said to Jonah, "Do you have a right to be angry about the vine?" "I do," he said. "I'm angry enough to die." The Lord said, "You have been concerned about this vine, though you did not tend it or make it grow. It sprang up overnight and it died overnight. But Nineveh has more than 120,000 people who could not tell their right hand from their left, and many cattle as well. Should I not be concerned about that great city?"
And it ends. That's where you end the book like this? With God's words hovering how much He loves these wicked people and their animals? Yeah. The whole nation of Israel needed to hear this. So God goes through this whole thing with Jonah so that Jonah can have it written down so the whole nation of Israel can think on, I think I would do that too. I think God would have to say that to me too. Because their view of the Gentiles, especially ones like Ninevites, was so hardened and hateful. That's why when Jesus says, you've heard it said, love your neighbor, but hate your enemy. That's what they were being taught. Of course you should hate your enemies. God hates them. Let's hate them too. And when they suffer, yay God! Cheerlead at their destruction. Jesus had to correct that. Jonah had to be corrected on that as well. Obadiah had to correct the Edomites about that as well. Now, what does it have to do with Revelation? First of all, doesn't Revelation, when John sees heaven, sorry if you're not privy to this, we'll get there, but when John sees heaven's scene unfold, where there are people around God's throne worshiping Him from every tribe, language, nation, and people, what is he seeing if not this? That God cares about the wicked ones and calls them to Himself? Wow. So that if you go to heaven thinking that, or the new creation, however you put it, if you go there and you expect everyone to be like you because you're the kind that God likes, whether it's race or something, He's like, nope. Like, learn from Jonah. I love all these folk. Now, this is the other reason why we need to keep this in mind when you get to Revelation. When you see God, like in the other prophets, when you see God pouring out such vicious wrath on the wicked, it's very easy to think, that is not the kind of God I thought I worshipped. My God's a loving God. I like the Jonah kind of God. And you think, well, God must just hate folks. But keep in mind, would God have punished the Ninevites if they didn't repent? Totally. So what, is He changing No. He's the same God who loves them, but judgment has to fall. Unless. And so keep that in mind when you get to Revelation. This is not a story of how much God hates people and can't wait for them to suffer. It's the story of a judge who has to execute judgment in order for justice to be done. In order for innocent blood to be answered for. Not a God who's cheerleading death and destruction on people. Keep Jonah in mind as you get to Revelation, or you can walk away very disturbed about who God is, just like you can from all the prophets that talk about that. Okay, how about Micah? He's next. We're almost there. I don't even know if we're going to make it through. We'll see. All right. Let's see. Oh, how about this? Chapter 4. Micah 4. And again, the story of the prophets all the way through are judgment on the wicked and blessing and protection and salvation for the righteous. And here's just another sampling of that. What was I wanting to look at here? So let's look at... let's look at 11 through 13. Yeah, let's look at 11 through the end of that chapter. 11, 12, and 13. Will somebody read those?
Now many nations are assembled against you, saying, Let him be defiled, and let our eyes gaze upon Zion. But they do not know the thoughts of the Lord. They do not understand his plan, that he has gathered them as sheep to the threshing floor. Arise and thresh, O daughter of Zion, for I will make your horn iron, I will make your hooves bronze. I shall beat in peace many peoples, and shall devote their gain to the Lord, their wealth to the Lord, and the whole earth.
Now, there's a lot going on there, but basically, if I could summarize, God's saying the nations are gathering against my people, thinking that they've got this whole thing figured out, and they're going to beat my people. That's what they think. But they don't know God's plan. What's God's plan? He says, what does he say to Israel? Look at this again. Verse 13. Rise and thresh, daughter Zion, for I will give you, what? Horns of iron. And then what is he going to give them?
Hooves of bronze.
Oh, now why would he do that? So that they can, with their hooves and with their horns, take out their enemies. Totally have triumph and victory over their enemies. In other words, you look so weak and helpless, and the nations are like rubbing their hands together, licking their lips, can't wait to take out God's people. They're all getting together for the party. Take out God's people. And what does God say? That's what they think. I've got different plans. And I'm going to make you the triumphant ones, Israel. Now, you need to put this in your back later, because when you get to Revelation, you're going to see a similar storyline of the nations and the powers of earth gathering against God's holy ones, his saints, his prophets and all those. And they think that they've triumphed. But guess what God's plan is? That they couldn't see coming. When the end hits, it's the church that's triumphant. It's the saints that win. And no one could have guessed it. Because they don't just have horns of iron and hooves of bronze. They are the immortal, resurrected ones who will reign on the earth. Like, all of this is so consistently the story of God throughout the whole prophetic picture. I love this. What else? Where are we? Micah. Okay. Look at chapter 7:13. Just a little quick one here. Micah 7:13. We saw this before in Isaiah and others, but look at the language here. The earth will become desolate because of its inhabitants as the result of their deeds. Now, this is going to be a picture throughout Revelation. You're going to see different ways of picturing that. The earthly and the heavenly things are just totally getting torn up. A third of this turns to blood. A third of those animals die. Like, just a lot of destruction and mayhem on the earth. But notice, why is this happening? Because of its inhabitants, as a result of their deeds. And there's an interesting line in Revelation, we'll see when we get there, but it says that God is going to judge those who destroy the earth. I remember hearing this when I was back in junior college. I was going to a Bible study, and I don't know why we were looking at it, but we did. And I remember thinking to myself, Israel, do you know one of the main reasons why God said Israel is being taken out of their land for 70 years into captivity? This is weird. Like, I usually think of the big sins of Israel, and there's a lot of them. But why 70 years? Here's what God says. This is wild. It blew my mind when I realized this. He said, I told you to let your land rest. I told you to let your land rest every 7th year. And you wouldn't do it. So now, or 70, sorry. So now I have to take you out of the land, and you're going to be there for one year for every cycle that you didn't let the land rest. I'm going to force the land to have a chance to rest because you wouldn't do it. Why did God care so much about how Israel treated the land? Apparently God cares about his planet, go figure. And this is this here in Micah as well as in Revelation. We see God actually is going to bring judgment on humanity for the way we've been dealing with things in this world. That's pretty, I don't know, that struck me. Because I always think, well, the earth is going to pass away anyway. Do what you're going to do. Well, maybe not. Maybe God does care a lot about how we treat it. Anyway, moving on. Where are we? We're in Micah. Let's go to Nahum. You still with me? We're going to make it. It's not much longer. Okay.
We're with you.
Thank you. Now, Nahum, guess who the big villain is in Nahum? Do you see the headings? Okay, so God was really kind to Nineveh when Jonah went to them. It doesn't look like it was very effective to help them change. It looks like they were willing to repent to escape the guillotine drop, but once that passed, you get back to... Have you ever known people like that, by the way? They'll be nice and good until danger's gone, and they're back to who they were. Sure, that's how it was with Nineveh. Their hearts hadn't really changed. They were just scared of dying. Okay, you'll do a lot to stay alive. What I wanted to show you about this, though, is kind of both a comparison and a contrast. When Nineveh falls, according to the prophecy, there will be an interesting reaction from those who find out about it. Now, in this prophecy, Nineveh is the big, bad, wicked power in the world. In Revelation, the big, bad power in the world is called Babylon. But the pattern is exactly the same. And I think, we'll get there, but I think that's one reason why John uses the word, or God does in the vision at least, the word for this big, bad power of the world being Babylon, is Babylon stands for the big, bad powers of the world throughout the storyline. In this case, it's Nineveh at this time of history. Anyway, what is the response of people when Nineveh falls? When in all her glory and in all of her apparent unstoppable power, Nineveh actually does fall, which is very humbling for Americans when we think that America seems unstoppable, it's on top of the world, and you realize the nations of the world have always had vulnerabilities, and God, if he decides to, can bring any nation down. But anyways, look at verse 7. They're going to be humiliated and brought down by God for all their wickedness. And what is the reaction of people in verse 7? Somebody read that, please.
Which chapter?
I'm sorry. That's an important detail. Chapter 3, verse 7. Thank you for asking. Nahum 3:7.
And all who look on you will shrink and flee from you and say, Nineveh is laid waste, who will pity and bemoan her? Where then shall I seek comforters for you?
So, how are people feeling about the fall of Nineveh? It says, who will mourn for her? Where can I find anyone to comfort you? How are they feeling about the fall of Nineveh? Yeah, woohoo! Someone finally took her down. Yes, That seems to be the general reaction to the fall of Nineveh because of how awful they were to everybody. As I said, they were ruthless, and everyone knew it. How about verse 19?
There is no healing for your wound. Your injury is fatal. All who hear of your destruction will clap their hands for joy. Where can anyone be found who has not suffered from your continual cruelty?
Whoa. I can't look anywhere on earth and find anyone that has not been hurt by you. You horrible people, Now, this is interesting because the reaction of the people to the fall of the great big bad power of the world here is a little bit different in Revelation about the fall of the big bad Babylon. And what we're going to see there is a lot of people were mourning the loss of Babylon, whatever that means. We'll get there. Because they were benefiting from Babylon's greatness, and specifically the merchants. The people who were getting rich off of Babylon, when Babylon fell, how'd they feel? Oh man, there goes my bread basket. Darn it, I was getting off good with them being there. Now they fell and there goes my money. But same idea though. Are they sad because Babylon itself is not there? Are they feeling bad because they love Babylon? No one's going to miss them. They're just going to miss the lucrative opportunity it brings. It's very humbling. Very humbling. As the most powerful and what you can consider greatest nation on earth today, we Americans, just keep these things in mind. We are at the mercy of God all the time. Always. And every single empire that we see described in the prophets, they thought the same way of themselves as we think of ourselves. Who can overcome us? And by the way, some of them stood longer than we've stood as a nation, in time and space. I think about Rome, by the way, which might have been the Babylon John's writing about in Revelation. They weren't just around for a couple hundred years. They seemed like they could never be defeated, because look how long they've been around on top of the world. Anyways, how about Habakkuk? I'm going to have to be brief on these last ones.
Where modern day Nineveh is?
What's that?
Was mentioning where modern day Nineveh is?
Yeah, tell them.
Iraq.
It's Iraq. And it's interesting, when I was in I was still in elementary school. I remember there being a book fair at the school, in the library, all these books are on sale. And even then I had interest in these things. And there was a book there about how Saddam Hussein was going to be the one that brought back the power of Babylon. Obviously, that was a very bad interpretation of Revelation. He did not do what they thought he was going to do just because he was growing in power in the place of power. No. Just be aware, a lot of people that take Revelation super literally make all kinds of guesses about how things are going to go down, and how does it turn out? Nope. There's a danger to that, and that's why I'm going through some of this, to make sure we're not trying to make Revelation into something it isn't intended to be. Okay.
Pastor Ryan, I have
Yeah.
one question.
Sure.
This is backing up. Did you say that the Edomites were the descendants of Esau?
Right.
And how did you pronounce this chapter?
Habakkuk?
Habakkuk.
Yeah.
Okay.
I might be wrong. It's Hebrew, so But, yes, Habakkuk. Where do we want to go here? Okay, yeah. Chapter 1, verse 13. This is actually common throughout the scriptures, but this is a statement here. By the way, Habakkuk is somebody who's very honest and forthright with God, isn't afraid to complain to God about what he's up to. We call them complaints in the headings of the NIV. Habakkuk's complaint. Habakkuk's second complaint. And so God's kind of humoring Habakkuk. He could do what he does with Joel. Where were you? When he could pull the Job card and say, you don't have a right to question me, little man. But he actually humors Habakkuk and gives him answers to his complaints. This is one of the complaints that Habakkuk had as he looked at the world around him, and how God's people, the righteous ones, were being treated terribly, but how the wicked people seem to be getting along just fine. Have you ever thought that about our world?
Yeah.
Why is it so hard on the righteous and the wicked seem to be just doing fine? Well, that's always been the story, and it's always been a question we've had. Look at verse 13 here. Your eyes are too pure to look on evil. You cannot tolerate wrongdoing. By the way, this is one of the reasons why people say that God turned his back on Jesus on the cross, because he can't look at evil, and Jesus had taken all the sins of humanity on himself. A really bad way to use this verse. I've already told you before, I don't think that's true. God didn't turn his back on Jesus. And this is one of the go-to verses to say that he did. I'm like, no, don't take this verse and do whatever you want with it. Anyway, your eyes are too pure to look on evil. You cannot tolerate wrongdoing. Why then do you tolerate the treacherous? Why are you silent while the wicked swallow up those more righteous than themselves? God, when are you going to avenge our blood? Just like we're going to see in Revelation. Same question, same problem, but the beautiful answer in Revelation is clear. I am going to do it, but I have to wait until all the innocent blood is shed. Then I'll take care of this. Now, that doesn't make it feel any better, but at least it gives you an answer. It gives you some clarity. What else? Zephaniah is next. Oh man, look at the first word of God's message through Zephaniah. In Zephaniah chapter 1, verse 2. Will somebody read that? Zephaniah 1, verse 2.
I will sweep away. I will sweep away everything from the face of the earth, declares the Lord.
Okay. Like, that is so entire. Everything swept away. Gone. And you're going to have language like that in the book of Revelation as well. Now, does God literally do that? No. No. The prophetic language is poetic. It is meant to scare people. It is meant to shake you and cause you fear. Because if you don't fear the wrath of God, in their case, you will never stop sinning.
Does a good job of it, too.
It does. No, I don't think that's God's preferred method of getting us to repent. But he knows who he's dealing with. And he says, just like to the Ninevites, look, if you don't repent, Mom and Dad, have you ever wanted to take a different route, but you had to go the threat route? Mom and Dads know. Kids would maybe respond to being reasoned with, but they hardly ever do. So you got to go the route they'll actually understand you. That's God's method too. But the language here throughout chapter 1 and onward is very similar to what we're going to see in Revelation. We just don't have time to look at that.
Pastor Ron,
Yeah.
it's interesting too because after Noah, God said he would never destroy the earth again like that.
Well, he did say he wouldn't flood it.
Oh, okay.
So he actually reserves other options to destroy it. Yeah, he just won't use water that time. In fact, what we know is he's going to use fire next time. He'll do it. He'll just use fire.
But he never did actually destroy the earth the first time, did he? It was the same earth.
Yeah, he destroyed all life on it.
All life
Yeah.
on it.
Yeah. Except for those on the ark. Yeah.
Fish did okay.
The fish seemed to do okay. There wasn't an aquarium on the ark as far as we know, right? Where were we? Zechariah. Oh my gosh, I skipped Haggai.
Zephaniah.
Oh, did we not do Zephaniah yet? Oh, we just did. We looked at that one verse. I'm just going to, like a hummingbird, land because we're already out of time here. I'm actually pushing you past the time. I'm sorry. Give me 2 more minutes. In Zephaniah, let me just tell you, and you can write it down if you're doing that. In Zephaniah, In Zephaniah, I got to stop saying that. In Haggai, chapter 2, verses 6 and 7, God uses the language of shaking. One more time, once more, I'll shake the heavens and the earth, the sea and the dry land. That same kind of heavens, earth, sea, and land, that whole poetic expression is going to be in Revelation over and over again. And Hebrews writer picks up on this statement in Haggai 2, and he talks about how the great shaking of everything is going to be the final destruction of the first creation so the new creation can come in. So Haggai 2 connected to Hebrews 12, and you're going to see something that we see in Revelation. Zechariah I wrote more on Zechariah than just about any other prophet here, and there's no way I can go through all of it. But here, can I just give you some highlights? Zechariah is probably the most similar to Revelation of all the prophets. If you want to do a little bit of perusing, getting ready for next week, you might want to go through Zechariah. You've got pictures of chariots with horses of different colors, similar to the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, as we call them. There is a stone with 7 eyes on it that, according to chapter 4, verse 10, signifies the eyes of Yahweh that range throughout the earth. The idea of 7 eyeballs, and eyeballs in general, too many eyeballs for our comfort level, is a big deal in Revelation. So just know that that's not new to Revelation. That happens here in Zechariah. There is this scroll in chapter 5 with writing on both sides, which is very unusual in the ancient world. And there are curses on this scroll. Same thing that we're going to see in Revelation. There's so many parallels. There's a third of a people that are going to be saved. 2/3 are going to be destroyed. That 1/3 language is there in Revelation. I really invite you to go to look at chapter 14 later on, because it talks about descriptions of a day coming where there's no sunlight or darkness. There's no distinction between day and night. During the evening times, there's light. There's water, living water flowing from Jerusalem in summer and winter. Yahweh's king of the whole earth. Like, you compare Zechariah 14 to Revelation at the very end in chapter 21 and 2, and you're like, whoa, I think God's really sure about this. And now finally, let's look at Malachi. Malachi is the end of the Old Testament, and at the very end of Malachi is a very interesting promise. It's actually a brutal picture leading up to the end here. It's pretty harsh, but I wanted to show you one more thing. Actually, right before you get to chapter 4, look at chapter 3, verse 18. Will you look at that? Because this is a big, like I've mentioned many times tonight, this is a huge theme throughout the storyline of the prophets, and we have to keep this in mind for Revelation. You will again see the distinction between the righteous and the wicked, between those who serve God and those who do not. You will again be able to tell the difference. Because remember what we saw back in Haggai. Lord, why? Why won't you deal with the wicked? Why are they seeming to do well and the righteous are suffering? God's like, I get it. It looks like that right now. There's coming a day where you'll actually be able to tell there's a benefit for being righteous. You'll see it. And the wicked are going to get theirs. You'll see it. Right? Keep that in mind. That's clear declaration of God. And one last thing. In the end, in chapter 4, there's another picture where God says that the righteous will triumph over the wicked. If I could just read this for you real quick. So in Malachi chapter 4, verse 2 and verse 3. But for you who revere my name, the Son of Righteousness will rise with healing in its rays. And you'll go out and frolic like well-fed calves. That probably doesn't speak to us like it did to them. Okay. But then, look at verse 3. Then you will trample on the wicked. They will be ashes under the soles of your feet on the day when I act, says Yahweh Almighty. Now again, we might be uncomfortable, like, I don't want to trample on anybody's ashes, Lord. Okay, good. That probably means you have the heart of Christ in you. But the point is, you who seem like you're being trampled on now, because you're righteous, the day is coming when God's going to flip the tables over, and the righteous are going to be on top. The righteous are the ones victorious. And it's the wicked who will finally see the horrors of living in rebellion against God. So, I'm really sorry that it was really fast and furious. Hopefully not too fast, too furious. But I hope you can see that everything we're about to find in Revelation has really already been laid down for us. What we're about to encounter in Revelation, which is why I'm so excited to do it, is that you're going to see God, through his vision to John, piece it all together in one big, beautiful, but disturbing vision. So here's what I'm going to ask you to do, if you're able to do that. This week, would you give Revelation a read-through? Now, there's 22 chapters, so if you can't get through all of it, I understand. But if you're willing to maybe pause what you've been reading otherwise, if that's possible for you, it's really hard to study Revelation without having at least read through it once. You don't want to take Revelation in little bitty bites at a time, unless you've seen the sweeping saga first. It's like watching a movie and pausing it every 10 seconds to talk about it. Oh my gosh, that would drive me crazy. Let me see the next 10. So watch the movie, then we'll talk about it. Rather than let's watch 10 seconds at a time. That'll really get tedious. So if you're willing to do that. If not, we've, God willing, got many weeks to do this, so you can be reading it as we go. But I think that will really help you if you do that. Okay. Woo, woo. If you've never really looked at the prophets carefully, I hope tonight does at least that. I hope it gives you this whetting your appetite to get to know them better. They're so good. Yeah.
Well, I'm saying if anybody likes listening and watching, if you look on the internet, punch in Revelations, awesome effects. It brings up Revelations and it has it on the screen and they read it to you with the effects behind it are awesome.
So there are visuals to go with what you're hearing.
Yeah, it's really good.
I'm glad you brought that up because I wanted to mention that.
What is it?
Revelations, awesome effects.
Okay.
Is it Revelations with an S on the end?
Or Revelation,
okay.
Awesome effects.
I'll write it on the board in case you wanted to write that down. Revelation, awesome effects.
Yeah. It's good. It's rich.
YouTube can be useful to the kingdom.
Yeah.
It can also be useful to the enemy, as we know.